Hi, folks. Thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes here while we wait for everyone to come in. Thank you. All righty, folks. Um, thank you everyone for joining us today. I know we've got some folks filing in, but we got a lot to get through today, so I want to make sure we're being mindful of everyone's time. Just a couple of things here on the agenda. There's been a couple of things that have popped up over the last couple of months and weeks that I think are worth diving into. We'll be focusing on a couple of core issues today. First of all, California's greenhouse gas reporting law, or SB 253, that we recently sent a letter into the state of California on. And then the second is going to be the upcoming USMCA, or United States Mexico Canada Trade Agreement, bit of a mouthful, review that is getting kickstarted right now. It's starting. And the official beginning of that is July 1st of 2026, but we're already starting the process of getting influence and making sure that our voices are heard. And then finally, we're going to be able to have a brief update from WDMA President and CEO, John Crosby, looking at some of the operational updates and some exciting new news that comes out of the board meeting and things to look forward to this next year. And with that, we will get stuck in. So as many of you guys were aware and were able to participate in and offer feedback on, the California Air Resource Board is beginning to implement mandatory greenhouse gas reporting for large entities, so large companies, under their Senate Bill 253. It's also known as the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act. This law really applies to companies doing business in California with over $1 billion in annual revenues. And that's $1 billion nationwide. It's not specific to California. And those companies are going to have to publicly disclose their emissions data for scopes 1 and 2 next year to the state of California, with scope 3 beginning in 2027. So it's a significant amount of reporting, and it was designed initially to try and align with existing protocols and some international reporting, but there is some inconsistency and some complexity that is providing an overlap, and we're going to be working with them to deal with that. Now, this law does have reporting fees associated with it. It is estimated to be around, by the state of California, to be around $3,106. Not sure how they got that accurate, but per reporting entity. So it's per company that reports into the state. And there is going to be another similar law, SB 261, that applies to entities reporting $500 million or more in annual sales. that will require a company to list a financial risks and measure financial risks disclosure and measures being taken to mitigate those risks. And that report is due on or before January 1st, 2026. That has a slightly different fee associated with it. It's a little over $1,000 that the state of California has estimated, and those are just estimates. It could be more, it could be less, depending upon what happens. But it's something to certainly be keeping an eye on, and something that we're keeping a very close eye on here at WDMA. So, what does this mean? What does this mean for me? The age-old question. Large manufacturers with operations and major sales in California are going to be, especially those who are going to be tied with aluminum, vinyl, glass in our supply chains, they're going to be most heavily exposed. If you do, obviously, we have to determine if we are doing more than $1 billion in sales annually. Congratulations if you are. And once you determine that you qualify, there is likely going to be a significant lift in terms of scope 1 and 2 reporting that's going to need to happen. This also gets into something that, I think with our suppliers, maybe something that you will see coming down the pipeline is being asked to supply scope 3 data. And that again is another indirect exposure in the indirect impact that we're going to be seeing from this. And I think it's going to be a much more wide ranging than I think the state of California has been able to articulate. Some of the key challenges that I've heard from members and that looking over the rule identified is that there's a lot of duplicative reporting across multiple state and federal systems. And there's a huge amount of lack of clarity on some of the acceptable verification standards, whether that's ISO, ISAE, or ISA frameworks will be recognized. It's not quite clear. And then it's got a real serious timeline pressure. This is, starting next year. They haven't yet finalized the rule around this, around the reporting of it. So it's happening at a lightning speed, and it's not quite clear yet that it's going to be done as thoughtfully as it could have if they gave themselves more time to do this. The state of California gave themselves more time, and manufacturers. And we're working to try and change that, but it's going to be ultimately up to the state of California what they decide they want to do. So where do we go next from here? So we have at WDMA, in our letter to the California Air Resource Board, or CARB, we sent in some formal comments emphasizing 3 priorities: avoiding duplicative data collection requirements, harmonizing those reports with those reporting rules of the EPA and SEC frameworks that already exist and collect some of this data, and clarifying which third-party assurance providers are going to be accepted. It wasn't entirely clear in the scope of reporting rule that was out earlier this month, what that would look like. And I think, as a matter of due diligence, I think we should start to really be thinking about, determining our eligibility, do we fall into one of those 2 categories? Do we make more than $1 billion worth of sales, or $500 million worth of sales? And then secondly is to start inventorying our facility emissions and really beginning to get to grasp on what those scope 1 and 2, areas, GHG areas are, and really doing a full audit of what that looks like. I know there are folks out there, consultants out there that can help, but it is an arduous task, and it is something that I absolutely sympathize with. That it can be a real challenge. So within that, we also want to be, starting to get that scope 3 process started. That will be a really significant lift to, as we found out with the PFAS, where getting the supplier data on where PFAS lives in their systems was is a real challenge, and this is going to be likely going to be a similar type of problem. Going to suppliers, asking for their GHG data. Do they keep it in the model that you're looking for? It will be a really significant lift, and something that I think we need to start earlier rather than later. And then, going beyond this, I think this is an area where we really need to, where WDMA will be keeping a very sharp eye going forward, where ideas like this are going to keep cropping up. I don't see this necessarily going away. It is limited, because a lot of this stuff is already being collected by the EPA and the SEC. But we are seeing some interest from New York, Washington, and Massachusetts. So really big markets, places where there's already a lot of regulation and where we're already experiencing problems around EPR and PFAS. So really being able to stay ahead of this, and we will continue to keep an eye out and engage where appropriate to try and make sure that these lawmakers and stakeholders are making an educated decision when it comes to requiring this sort of data. So that's a brief rundown on the California law that we were talking about earlier. And I want to quickly move into the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement review. This is a process that was put into the initial treaty. After 6 years, there would be up for review. That starts at July 1st, 2026. And we're really beginning to see from the Trump administration, they're likely going to take what it's sort of a catch-all term, but an America First trade enforcement policy. And what that really means is prioritizing U.S. content, U.S.-made content, stronger enforcement, and some tariff flexibility. I think there's also a real emphasis from the Trump administration. There has been since they started last year, or earlier this year, I should say, to really focus on manufacturing and building our manufacturing base. So there is, real hope that they're going to really follow through on that and make sure that manufacturing in the United States continues to be strengthened going forward. We also, are hoping that there will be tariff relief tied to this, tied to compliance and or domestic production goals. With the review, it could become a much broader tool for renegotiation rather than a simple renewal. So we're really hoping ultimately that this gets fully renegotiated and set beyond what is ultimately the deadline for these renewals, which is 2036, and we can have a lasting certainty in our trade agreements with Canada and Mexico. So what are we going to do about it? For our members, there's a couple of red flags that were raised in the process. The tightening of the rules of origin could increase input costs, especially for aluminum, glass, and hardware imports. And continued tariff exposure could expand under the new enforcement approaches. And this is something we really want to keep a very close eye on as we go through the process, what that may look like. And there has been talk of linking trade enforcement and border and labor policies. This could further complicate measures. Customs guidance may remain unclear as some of these priorities shift around in the ether. I know that the customs situation has been fluid over the last year. I think that goes both for workforce and in terms of tariff policy. But overall, we're seeing just a general push, I think, from all sides of the borders, really, on Mexico and Canada, for a reshoring and domestic sourcing. Something this is, in principle, this is a positive measure, but it needs to be managed and really done so carefully and with a scalpel, not a 2x4. That's what we're really hoping for, is to really have a thoughtful discussion about what that looks like and how we go forward from here. So what's going to happen? So this is just a broad outline of what the what the process, how it started, and what's going to happen going forward from here. So the USMCA was signed into force on July 20th, 2020. And then it's been going great. Within there's a clause after 6 years, it'll be up for review. That's now, beginning now. So we're starting domestic consultations and stakeholder input, which comes in the form of a comment period, which is currently open, and we plan on submitting a letter on November 3rd, which will be open to members of the Legislative and Regulatory Committee shortly to review. And then, as we move into July 1st, 2026, that's when the mandated review period starts, where all Mexico, Canada, and the United States will get in a room and decide what needs to change. Do we want to renew? Do we want to, just renew for the year, or do we want to have a complete affirmation or a ratification of a new treaty? So that starts next year, and that will continue. And then after, I think there was some confusion when I was talking to some folks about this earlier. They have to vote every year this board has to vote to renew it every year until the treaty runs out in 2036, if they cannot extend it beyond that. So there will be a vote. Do we want to continue to have it? Yes, great. We'll continue, kick the can to next year, and we'll keep negotiating. And that will continue until 2036, until it runs out. If it does, I am optimistic that will not happen, but it may. It may. Like anything, the world is full of possibilities. So here are the potential outcomes. So I gamed out some of the potential outcomes. This was actually a really great chart that I pulled from CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, that really did a great job of gaming out what the potential options were and outcomes for the trade agreement. These negotiations will happen. Complete renewal agreement extended to 2036 with potential updates. Great. Low likelihood. I think for me, looking at this, I think there's a real possibility of a serialized annual reviews until a renewal agreement extended beyond 2036 is reached. I think there is a lot of incentive on some of the other parties to see how long this can go and see what potential leverage can be had and what potential concessions can be gained from a slightly longer, drawn out negotiation process. Although I am fairly confident that there will ultimately be an extension. Yeah. All right. So looking ahead, our approach is going to focus on a couple of priorities: ensuring any new rules of origin changes are workable and not cost prohibitive, advocating for a stronger dispute resolution mechanism. Advocating for a stronger dispute resolution mechanism, along with which has opportunities. Supporting opportunities for regular, transparent reviews to prevent trade uncertainty and answer for the questions that change. There is a lot of change that happens in the trade world. There are shifting supply chains. It is very complex. There are droughts, there are floods, there are mines that run dry. There needs to be a consistent reevaluation of this treaty on a fairly regular basis. What that looks like, I'm not sure, but there really should be some transparent reviews and conversations that happen around this. But above all, promoting the free and fair trade across North America. This has been one of the great, I think, a real highlight of free trade and the benefits it can bring to communities across our three countries, and really benefiting and accelerating economic growth and integration. I know I have a great time working with our Canadian friends, and it's a real pleasure, and I look forward to doing that in the future, and I hope you all do too. So that is our rundown of my quick rundown of the United States, the USTR's, USMCA process that is ongoing. But I do want to, before we go to questions, quickly highlight for folks the Winter Committee Week. The legislative and regulatory committees will be having an in-person meeting. This is going to be this will be happening from December 9th to the 11th. I also was able to arrange the EPR presentation from some Wiley Rain experts, Martha Marparise and Mark Bulish. I've met them. They're fantastic. They've been doing EPR work when it first started with batteries. This is way back in the early 2000s. And they really do have a firm grasp on, what it is that we need to be worried about with EPR, where it's going, how to best engage with the regulatory bodies and those decision makers that are really driving this forward. So I think it's going to be a really great presentation and talk. And then that'll be followed the next day with a tour from the Home Innovation Research Labs, where I'm told they might set a wall on fire. So if you're not having fun there, then I don't know how to help you. But with that, I'm happy to open up with any questions, comments, concerns, or harangues that anyone may have. Okay. Well, I've got John Crosby with us, so I want to make sure that he's able to have be able to chat. So I'm going to pass it over to John here in a minute, and he can take it from here. Thank you, John.
Michael, thanks a lot. And for all of our guests, as you continue to percolate on everything that Michael just shared, don't hesitate to drop a question into the chat. We'll gladly process those questions here in a little bit. But since we have everyone's attention and with a lot of activity happening in WDMA over the last several weeks, I wanted to make sure that we could provide you with some update on advocacy operations. So all the things that go into ensuring that we have a vibrant operational support mechanism in order to get things done, in order to represent the industry and keep you informed and activated on key issues. So first of all, I want to point out 2025 has been what I call a liminal moment. Quick definition, a transitional state between two stages. I think we have gone through this year realizing that, number one, politically speaking, the country is in a bit of a shift from where it has been from a policymaking standpoint for probably 12 or more years. And the federal government is operating on in a state that isn't just, experiencing a shutdown, but actually even pre-shutdown, the policymaking environment was much more frozen than it has been in recent years. Having said that, state activity is ramping up. So that transitional state is kind of crucial for the go forward. But we also this year experienced some firsts. You heard from Michael, our first full-time lobbyist representing WDMA. And not only that, this year, first fully coordinated digital communications program so that we were regularly providing not just member alerts on policy activity, but continual ongoing education and information through our new Beyond the Frame newsletter, and then also through town hall presentations like this. And this year was also the first time we actually structured into our budget funding for state level advocacy. And we learned from the experience in 2024 with our efforts in Colorado that we needed to anticipate that more resources would be required, whether it be in Colorado or beyond. And we've certainly done so this year, primary example being in the state of Florida. So as we go forward, and just remembering one thing that I think is always incredibly valuable to say to all of you, because you're a part of this industry, but we also say it to anyone in the policymaking realm who will listen, that this industry influences really well. And I say that because we don't just come to the table with a hammer. We come with our minds and our hearts engaged in trying to solve problems. And that always yields a much better collaborative relationship when it comes to policymaking at the national or state levels. Oop, clicking too many times. But that engagement really does rely on all of you. And that's participating on our committees, serving in volunteer leadership positions, remembering that, that your voice really does have value both within our community and then when speaking to policymakers. I know many of you have attended our legislative conference. Not everyone feels completely comfortable in those situations, but it's just like working any other muscle. The more you do it, the easier it gets. And we always like to remember the old saying about getting involved is if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. That is a core principle of being involved in an association like WDMA. But our value only goes up with each and every individual thought leader's involvement in WDMA. We're in the process of developing a new strategy on advocacy for the association, and that's intended to provide guidance at the federal and state levels, but also to ensure that we are striking a balance between being defensively oriented and being offensively oriented so that we can try to drive some policy success that will shape future policymaking initiatives. That strategy is, again, in development, will be part of the discussion during the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee meeting that takes place in December. Of course, we're meeting next week, and so that process will begin then, and then culminate with the meetings in December here in Washington. So what's in store for 2026? 2 weeks ago, just before the start of the executive conference in Boston, the WDMA board met and approved a budget for 2026. And within that budget, there are several things that tie into advocacy. One of them being just ongoing funding for existing programs, which is absolutely fundamental. But we also sought to invest in areas to strengthen member engagement on policy activities. You all are probably familiar with Multi-State, the online service that actually provides all members and staff with access to state-level policymaking activity. That's an excellent resource for monitoring and information sharing. We're obviously continuing that relationship. Multi-State is doubly valuable for us because when we seek to engage at the state level, Multi-State has relationships with lobbying groups in all 50 state capitals, and we are utilizing them as the hub for identifying lobbying talent that we can engage where necessary. But we're also going to begin investing in some new areas. There's a company called Onboard, which offers an online collaboration platform for committees and association boards. And we're going to start ramping up implementation of Onboard in the beginning of the year. The goal there is to involve all of our committees so that rather than relying on episodic meetings and discussions, that we can actually do work together in a real-time environment through this application. And it actually provides more than just collaboration opportunity. It provides obviously document sharing and tracking of versions, but voting and polling on key issues. And it's just a super environment for involving groups of volunteers that are working on something together. The other application that we're going to be investing in is software from a company called Advocacy Associates. If you've attended our legislative conference, you know that the meeting scheduling process can be a bit wonky. Our goal with Advocacy Associates is to utilize a platform they've developed that will help anyone registered for our legislative conference to get meetings scheduled, and then to have an application on your phone that will allow you to track what meetings you have, who's involved in those meetings. So in some cases, many of you from different companies get invited to the same meeting. This would give you the ability to see who would be involved in those meetings. and then also to be updated when a change occurs with the meeting. So a really useful tool that will help to make your experience at our legislative conference more seamless and efficient. And then lastly, our board approved the initiation of what we're calling the WDMA Advocacy Advancement Fund. This is a pilot program that we're initiating actually immediately. We started with initial communication yesterday to all primary member contacts for member companies. The goal here is to ultimately to address some challenges that exist with state level policy activity escalating, things from PFAS and EPR, and as Michael mentioned, the climate disclosure rules, energy performance regulations. The proliferation of state level policymaking is straining our ability to actually scale up what we can do for members. And on top of that, we have a bit of a gap in our understanding of the industry from a data standpoint, understanding the metrics, the footprint of the industry, if you will, so that we could tell our advocacy story. We're asked all the time by legislators and regulators, what's the size and scope of your industry? How many people are employed? How many facilities in my state, for example? These are things we simply don't know. And so this fundraising effort is meant to address not just state level policy activity, but also to fill the donut hole in our advocacy story. We have a very lean budget and very lean operations. And what I mean by that is our budget is structured so that dues and our non-dues revenue go directly towards activities and services that primarily focus on advocacy work, whether it's in codes and standards or in state and federal policymaking. To make a quantum leap takes a little bit of effort and oftentimes more money than we have. So the ask has to do with everyone agreeing on the number one principle of associations is having strength and value in our numbers. It's a lot easier to make something happen when a group of companies come together and achieve some savings in the process, because doing it alone would be incredibly expensive, time consuming, and probably wouldn't yield the same result. Our ask with this fundraising effort is for member companies to pay 110%. And what that means is you're paying your dues on an annual basis. How about adding 10% that goes directly to making these quantum leaps in our ability to serve and support the industry through advocacy? We are proposing an expansion of state outreach and influence. In other words, a substantial portion of any funds raised would go directly to a deeper and broader strategy with state governments, so that we aren't simply playing defense, but we're actually getting out there and trying to influence and shape policy outcomes. And then the last is to execution on an economic impact study, which has been on WDMA's wish list for several years, but the expense is significant. We believe we can make that happen through a reasonable level of contribution from all member companies. For sure, this requires an all-in approach. This does not mean that, the top heaviness of the industry means all the larger companies should, fund something like this. This requires all of us to be in. If you believe in the value of what WDMA does for the industry, this becomes a common sense answer that every company should want to chip in on this effort. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Does anyone have questions, comments, concerns?
I've got one for you, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
How is the economic impact study going to help us better tell our story?
That's a great question. Through development of data about the industry, I say development, collection of data, and then analysis of that data about the industry, we're able to effectively set the foundation for why it is that policymakers should want to listen to us in the first place. It's not enough to simply say we represent the manufacturers of windows, doors, and skylights. That's great, and in some cases it works. But for those who aren't very familiar with the industry, they want to know a little bit more. How many, especially the questions around the economic footprint of a company, whether it's locally, in a state, or nationally. We're not looking to expose that for any individual company. We want the entire industry's footprint because it makes a statement about just what kind of force we have across the country. But that economic impact study isn't limited to just dollars and cents and people and facilities. It's also, how you're investing in R&D. It's your ESG policies and practices. It's how are you conducting philanthropy in your communities. A lot of the aspects of the story that we on WDMA staff do not have and don't have the capacity to collect by working with a company called Oxford Economic Research. Great, well-known organization out there that's done a ton of economic impact studies for associations across America. They've got a proven methodology that involves asking member companies questions about their operations and their footprint, but then also using a model that helps to extrapolate beyond just the member company base into the full depth and breadth of the industry. I see Steve Turek has raised his hand. Steve, hang on a second and I'll unmute you. Just a moment. Here we go. Oh, I got to ask to unmute. I think you need to.
Can you hear
There
me?
we go. Yep, Steve,
can
go
hear you.
ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just typing in the chat. I apologize, but I just had a quick question. In terms of the Advocacy Advancement Fund, has that information and that ask been channeled to the CEOs and the other leaders that were present in Boston? Or has it just gone through the regular company member communications portal? Because talking to my CEO this morning about it, he had not received or seen anything. So I just think it's you probably can't over communicate on this one.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Steve, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Our first wave yesterday was to our primary contacts. Our intention is to repeat this message over and over. But to your point about reaching the CEOs, there's two ways I had envisioned that we do that. One is reaching everyone who was at the executive conference because it was a topic of discussion at that event. The other is to reach all CEOs for all WDMA member companies, whether they were in Boston or not, and driving home the message of how important this is and why it exists. So every intention to do that. We just simply, out of courtesy to our primary contacts, we wanted to make sure that the groundwork was laid first with them.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We got another question in the chat for you, John. I'll read it out and feel free to respond. It's from Marty Miller. Can you provide some additional insight into how the Advocacy Advancement Fund will be utilized based on WDMA staff choice, executive committee choice, membership vote choice, individual member requests, others? As always, thank you for bringing the energy of change to the table. You're welcome, Marty. Thank you.
Marty, thank you for that question, and it's an excellent question to ask. First and foremost, the fund is specifically for now. I'm a firm believer that if this gets off the ground and it's something we can do on an annual basis, that it gets defined on an annual basis. So we have proposed to the board that the primary areas of focus for 2026 are where state level advocacy becomes most needed, and then also the need to collect data in order to tell a better story about the industry. I would say the priorities are in that order. Now, having said that, what you should understand is the WDMA board absolutely has oversight and honestly the authority to make decisions about where the investments go. So, for example, with respect to state level advocacy, there's not one state level advocacy opportunity that has arisen thus far in the last 2 years that has not gone through the WDMA Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee. So policy opportunities simply get vetted that way first. And then the question becomes, does WDMA need to engage, a lobbyist at the local level or at the state level in order to address this challenge? And if the answer is yes, then the board has the authority to then say, let's release funds from our advocacy fund in order to support that effort. I don't see that changing one bit in 2026. Now, the question that might be asked is, okay, if we don't meet our goal, so the goal for 2026 is $300,000. That would arguably cover what we believe is the necessary funds for a fully focused and formed state advocacy effort and execution on an economic impact study. If we don't raise to that goal, then the primary goal is state level advocacy, because we know we will have needs there. We already know there's 6 states where EPR regulations are either in development or have been developed, and we're looking at legislative fixes. So we know there's opportunities, but every WDMA member has an opportunity to weigh in on this, because every WDMA member has an opportunity to sit at minimum as a corresponding member of our Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee. So one of the things that we want to make sure happens is every member company has representation there, so that if a policy priority goes before that committee, everyone understands the why and the how, and then ultimately, what is the recommendation for the board to do something about it? And then the fund choice really comes down to the board. So staff will not drive these decisions. It really will be an industry-driven decision-making process. I hope that answered your question, Marty. If I missed something, I apologize. I will tell you, we'll share the FAQ from about the Advocacy Advancement Fund with everyone who signed up for the town hall today, because it does answer a lot of questions around that topic. Oh, that question was actually from Chip Gentry. Good job, hey, Chip. Good to know you're here, and thank you for sharing that. I did not know that was you, but glad you're here. Any other questions? Okay. Michael, I'm going to give it back to you. For those of you who sit on the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committees, or if you sit on any of WDMA's committees, we look forward to seeing you here in Washington the second week of December. If you are not serving on those committees, but you have interest, please reach out to Michael or me, and we will happily figure out a way for you to get engaged. We would love to have everyone here participating in that series of meetings, December 7th through 9th. I just think it's an invaluable part of the WDMA experience to be here in Washington for what will likely be a very vibrant and energetic discussion on a range of topics. Michael, final words, thoughts?
Nope, I'm just looking forward to seeing everybody in person in December. And if you have any other questions regarding anything that's been talked about today, feel free to reach out to myself or John. I'm really excited about the advancement fund and the economic impact study. I think it's one of the things that I get asked repeatedly in offices is, how many employees do you have in my district? How many employees do you have in my state? What is your overall investment in the state from your membership? And it gives the data behind the compelling story that we all have. So I'm really excited about it. But that is my final word. And thank you everybody for joining. I really appreciate you guys stopping in to spend some time with us on these. It really does mean a lot. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.